Putin sent another drone wave toward Ukraine, exactly the same way he had done it dozens of times before. This time, one of those drones missed its intended target and crossed into the territory of a NATO member state. The Kremlin immediately presented it as an unintended navigational error, the unavoidable side effect of a complex military operation. Romania did not accept that explanation, and the reason Romania rejected it comes down to a single number. This was not the first time a Russian drone had violated Romanian airspace. It was the 28th time. Bucharest's patience had reached its absolute limit, and what followed was not a diplomatic note of mild condemnation. Romania's response came without delay, came with precision, and came hard enough to permanently damage Russia's operational picture in the Black Sea. Behind that response lies a story that most international coverage has completely missed. It is the story of NATO's red lines, of the military transformation Romania has been quietly executing for 3 years, and of what happens when a cheap drone falls on exactly the wrong piece of ground. To understand why Romania's response carried the weight it did, you first need to understand exactly what happened on the night of May 29, 2026. Russia launched a 43-drone attack wave targeting the Ukrainian port of Ismail on the Danube River, which sits directly across from the Romanian border. Ukrainian air defenses intercepted the majority of those drones before they could reach their targets, but one of them, a Geran 2 drone, which is Russia's domestic copy of the Iranian-designed Shahd, deviated from its programmed course and entered Romanian airspace. Romanian radar systems were already tracking the drone as it crossed the border and moved over Romanian territory. 2 F-16 fighter jets were immediately scrambled from their base, and an IR-330 SOCAT military helicopter was also deployed to intercept the incoming threat. Romanian pilots received formal authorization to engage and shoot down the drone if they could reach it in time, but the drone was flying at extremely low altitude, just a few hundred meters above the ground, which made radar tracking and targeting significantly more difficult. It remained inside Romanian airspace for only 4 minutes, covering approximately 10 kilometers of Romanian territory in that window. The F-16s were airborne and the authorization had been formally given, but the pilots could not physically close the distance to engagement range before the drone completed its flight path. The drone struck a residential building in the city of Galati, injuring 2 civilians, one of whom was a 14-year-old child, and the Galati drone was not even the only Russian system that entered Romania that night. In the Maramaris region in Romania's northwest, hundreds of kilometers from Galati, another large unmanned aerial vehicle without an explosive payload was separately discovered on Romanian soil. Romania's defense ministry officially confirmed that both systems were Russian-made, leaving no room for the Kremlin's standard denial. Procedure: to fully understand the weight of what happened, you need to sit with the number 28 for a moment. Russia had violated Romanian airspace on 27 previous occasions since 2022, and each time the Kremlin offered the same explanation of accidental deviation. Each time Romania filed its protest through diplomatic channels, NATO was informed, and the incident was eventually absorbed into the growing archive of documented violations. But the 28th violation was structurally different from every previous one in a way that made the standard explanation impossible to sustain. Previous violations had involved debris, navigation errors over unpopulated areas, and incidents where no direct physical damage was recorded on Romanian soil. The 28th violation put a Russian explosive drone directly into a Romanian apartment building and sent a 14-year-old child to hospital. When an incident happens once, the explanation of accident is at least arguable. When the same category of incident happens 28 times in sequence, the word accident stops being a legitimate description of what is occurring. One local American resident in Galati named Stephen Evelyn put it in terms that required no strategic analysis to understand. He said this has happened 28 times, and he did not believe the Russians were doing it by accident or that they were that incompetent at waging war. That observation, coming from an ordinary person living in the city where the drone fell, captured the essential logic of Romania's entire response more clearly than any diplomatic document. Romania's institutional response began at the highest level of its national security architecture and moved with a speed that no NATO country had demonstrated since the start of the war. President Iohannis summoned the Supreme Council of National Defense, known by its Romanian acronym SAT, to an emergency meeting within hours of The confirmed strike after that meeting concluded, he stepped before the press to announce a series of decisions that collectively represented the most significant Romanian national security action in the current conflict. The first and most operationally consequential decision was the expulsion of Russian Consul General Andrei Kosilin from Constanta and the formal closure of the Russian consulate in that city. This decision was not a symbolic gesture chosen for its diplomatic optics. The closure of the Constanta consulate was a targeted operational action that removed a critical Russian intelligence asset from one of the most strategically sensitive locations in the entire European theater. Constanta is Romania's largest port city, and it hosts the largest NATO naval base on the Black Sea. It serves as the primary transit point for military equipment and civilian goods moving through the southern corridor to Ukraine. It's approximately 1 hour's travel from Europe's largest NATO military base at Mihailko Galnasenia and from the Devaselu ballistic missile defense installation, former United States Army Europe. Commander General Ben Hodges had publicly stated that Constanta would be among the first targets of any Russian military action against NATO. Romanian intelligence had already requested the expulsion of 2 Russian diplomats from Bucharest the previous year on documented grounds of gathering information about strategic infrastructure. The Constanta consulate had been operating for years as a monitoring post for NATO naval movements, port traffic patterns, and the flow of military supplies destined for Ukraine through the Black Sea corridor. Closing that consulate did not merely reduce Russia's diplomatic representation in Romania. It permanently blinded Russia's most valuable intelligence eye on NATO's Black Sea operational picture. At the same time, the Russian ambassador in Bucharest was formally summoned to the Foreign Ministry to receive Romania's official protest. SAD additionally proposed further sanctions targeting Russian diplomatic personnel. Remaining in Bucharest in a single night, Russia's ability to monitor, assess, and anticipate NATO activity in the Black Sea region was fundamentally degraded in ways that no amount of satellite imagery can fully replace. President Dan made the message behind these actions unmistakably clear in his press statement following the SAT meeting. Romania had definitively established the drone's source, its flight route, and its ownership, leaving no technical ambiguity that Russia could exploit for continued denial, Interim Prime Minister Ilie Bologin simultaneously took charge of the operational response, formally requesting that NATO urgently deploy additional military equipment specifically designed to detect and intercept low-altitude drone threats. The speed of Romania's institutional response was itself a strategic signal. No NATO country since the start of the war had moved from incident to formal National Security Council decision to expulsion of a foreign intelligence asset within the timeframe Romania demonstrated that night, beyond the immediate national response. Romania placed a card on the diplomatic table that carries implications extending across the entire alliance. Foreign Minister Ona Silvia Toiu stated clearly after the Galati incident that the previous night's events constituted an incident justifying the invocation of Article 4 of the NATO Treaty. Article 4 is the alliance's formal collective consultation mechanism, which allows any member state that believes its territorial integrity or security is under threat to request that all allied governments convene for formal consultation. It does not require military force to be used, and it does not commit any ally to a specific action, but its diplomatic weight is substantial because it places the entire alliance formally on record regarding a specific threat. The card has been played before in this conflict, and the results of its previous use are directly relevant to understanding what its invocation by Romania would mean. In September 2025, Poland activated Article 4 after 19 Russian drones entered Polish airspace in a single night, marking the first time the mechanism had been used in response to Russian airspace violations. The alliance response to Poland's Article 4 invocation was not limited to statements of solidarity. Polish F-16s, Dutch F-35s, and Italian AWACS aircraft responded together. At least 3 drones were shot down inside Allied airspace, marking the first time NATO aircraft had fired at enemy targets inside an Allied member state's territory in the alliance's history. Polish Prime Minister Tusk subsequently told Parliament that it was the closest Europe had been to open conflict since the Second World War. The concrete military outcomes of that Article 4 activation included additional Patriot batteries deployed to Poland, new airspace restrictions along the eastern border, and the launch of Operation Eastern Century. Romania's case for Article 4 invocation rests on ground that is diplomatically stronger than Poland's was in September 2025. When Poland activated the mechanism, 19 drones had entered its airspace in one night, but no Polish civilians had been physically injured and property damage was limited to a single house. Romania is presenting a case involving 28 cumulative violations across 3 years, a drone that struck a residential building directly, and civilian injuries including a child. The escalation ladder that NATO has been climbing since 2023 is now on a higher rung than it has ever been before, in 2023. Drone debris was found on Allied territory and NATO officially concluded there was no evidence of intentional attack. In 2025, Poland shot down drones in its airspace and Article 4 was activated for the first time in this context. In 2026, civilians were injured in Romania, a consulate was expelled, and Article 4 was placed formally on the table. Each step in that sequence is higher than the one before it, and at each step Russia's standard accident defense becomes slightly less credible to the audiences that matter, the NATO and European response. The Galati incident arrived quickly and carried language that went meaningfully beyond the standard expressions of solidarity. Secretary General Mark Rutte delivered a message of absolute alliance solidarity with Romania and reiterated that NATO is prepared to defend every square centimeter of Allied territory. United States Ambassador to NATO Matthew Whitaker characterized the incident as a reckless incursion that demanded a serious Allied response. NATO spokesperson Alison Hart went further than rhetorical condemnation, stating explicitly that potential additional defensive measures were being considered and evaluated. That specific framing signaled that NATO was moving toward operational steps rather than limiting its response to statements. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced the preparation of the 21st sanctions package against Russia, a package that had not been on the agenda before the drone fell on Galati. France summoned the Russian ambassador to its foreign ministry and condemned the incident as an extremely irresponsible act threatening the security of the entire region. France's response carries particular operational weight because French military personnel are currently stationed in Romania, meaning the drone strike on Romanian territory constituted an indirect threat to the forces of a nuclear-armed NATO ally. Ukrainian President Zelensky stated that Ukraine was prepared to support Romania in whatever form that support was needed. While the international community delivered unified condemnation, the Kremlin's position became increasingly isolated in ways that its standard denial procedure could not repair. Spokesman Peskov confirmed that Putin had been informed of the incident but declined to confirm whether the drone was of Russian origin. Romania had already disclosed the drone's model, trajectory, route, and confirmed ownership through technical forensic analysis, the country that dropped a drone on a NATO member's apartment. Building then issued retaliation threats in response to the diplomatic consequences of having done so. Romania placed the evidence publicly on the table, the alliance and the European Union announced their support in sequence, and Moscow had no remaining card to play except continued denial against documented proof. Romania's diplomatic response was historically significant, but the military transformation that gives that response its real weight is a story that has been unfolding quietly for 3 years and that the Galati incident brought into sudden clarity. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Romania was considered one of the more vulnerable links in NATO's eastern defensive architecture. It shared a 650-kilometer land border with Ukraine, possessed a strategically critical Black Sea coastline, and hosted ports and installations, well within the operational range of Russian missile and drone systems. But its military was still conducting air patrols with MiG-21 fighter jets, aircraft designed and built in the 1960s that were being used to defend against threats defined by the technology of the 2020s. 3 years later, the military picture has been transformed in ways that no comparable European NATO member has matched at the same pace. The MiG-21s were retired and replaced with F-16 Fighting Falcons acquired from Portugal and Norway, and by 2026 Romania's fleet had grown to 49 operational aircraft. With an additional 18 F-16s coming from the Netherlands, the fleet is expected to reach 66 to 67 modern multi-role fighters by the end of the current year. The F-16s that scrambled over Galati on the night of May 29 were part of this fleet, and their pilots had formal authorization to engage. But the 4-minute window the drone spent in Romanian airspace was not sufficient to close the distance to engagement range. Romania is building the architecture specifically designed to close that window permanently for any future violation. The most critical addition to the architecture for the specific threat demonstrated at Galati is the drone interception layer. Merup's drone interceptors, developed by a company connected to former Google CEO Eric Schmidt's Project Eagle initiative, were tested in Romania during a NATO exercise in April 2026 called LSEX. Crucible Eastern Phoenix, that exercise brought more than 400 troops and defense industry representatives together, and the systems were tested specifically against maritime drone threats matching the profile of what struck Galati. Romania's defense minister confirmed after the exercise that the Merup systems would be operational within days of the exercise's conclusion. The drone fell on Galati approximately 1 month after that test, meaning the intercept layer that could have stopped it was already in the final stages of deployment when the violation occurred. The ground forces transformation has proceeded in parallel with the air defense restructuring and extends Romania's capabilities into domains that directly address the regional threat picture. Soviet era tank inventories are being replaced with M1A2 SEP V3 Abrams main battle tanks, representing a generational leap in armored capability. HIMARS rocket artillery systems with a 300-kilometer range give Romanian ground forces the ability to strike targets across the Black Sea, including assets of the Russian fleet that has been degraded by the Ukrainian campaign described in previous analyses. But perhaps the single most strategically significant development in Romania's military transformation is the decision to build an indigenous drone production capability rather than remaining solely dependent on imported systems. 18 Bayraktar TB2 armed drones have been delivered and are operational with Romanian forces. A joint drone production agreement has been signed with Ukraine, combining Ukrainian operational experience with Romanian industrial capacity. A separate drone production and testing framework has been established with the United States and the United Kingdom, integrating Romania into the Western defense technology ecosystem at the production level rather than merely the procurement level. Romania is no longer a country that relies on others to defend it from drone threats. It is becoming a country that designs, produces, and deploys drones of its own, a transformation that changes its strategic position in the region permanently. The package covered 15 separate capability development programs, including mechanized warfare modernization, layered air defense construction, Black Sea naval reinforcement, helicopter fleet renewal, and defense industry localization. 8 days after that approval was signed, a Russian drone fell on a Romanian apartment building and injured a Romanian child. The strategic reasoning behind the safe approval, which had previously required explanation to general audiences, became self-evident to everyone watching within hours of the Galati strike. The geography underlying all of these decisions is the factor that transforms the Galati incident from a bilateral diplomatic dispute into a matter of direct concern for the entire Western security architecture. Romania's 650-kilometer border with Ukraine means that Russian drone attack waves targeting Ukrainian ports on the Danube pass directly along Romania's frontier on every operation. The port of Ismail, which was the target of the 43 drone wave that produced the Galati violation, sits on the opposite bank of a river that forms the boundary between the two countries. Romania's Black Sea coastline places it in direct geographic proximity to the waters where the Russian fleet has been systematically degraded by the Ukrainian naval campaign. The Devaselu military installation in southern Romania hosts the NATO Aegis Ashore ballistic missile defense system, which uses SM-3 interceptors to destroy medium-range ballistic missiles in flight and represents one of the foundational pillars of Europe's missile defense architecture. Russia has demanded the removal of this system for years, viewing it as a direct challenge to its strategic deterrent posture, but Devaselu remains fully operational. Mihailko Galnasinian Constanta is undergoing a $2.7 billion expansion that is transforming it into NATO's largest military base in Europe, with approximately 3,500 Allied troops permanently stationed there. The LEMP repositioning program is converting the base into a forward logistics depot capable of sustaining large-scale Allied operations, and the presence of American personnel there creates a bilateral tripwire that would activate a United States military response independently of any NATO consensus requirement. The NATO Arms Supply Coordination Hub opened in Romania in January 2026 operates in parallel with the facility in Rzeszów, Poland, creating a southern logistics corridor that has been moving weapons and equipment to Ukrainian forces along the Donbass and southern front axis. The drone that fell on Galati did not fall on an ordinary European city. It fell on the geographic lock of NATO's entire southeastern defensive and logistics architecture, in a country where the missile shield is based, where Europe's largest NATO base is being built, and where the southern weapons pipeline to Ukraine originates. The picture now is fundamentally different from what it was when the first Russian drone violated Romanian airspace in 2022. Romania has F-16s with authorized engagement rules and pilots trained to use them against exactly this category of threat. Romania has passed a law explicitly authorizing the shoot-down of unauthorized drones entering its airspace, legislation enacted for precisely the scenario that played out at Galati. Romania has a layered air defense system that, once the MARIPS intercept layer reaches full operational status, will address the low-altitude drone threat that the 4-minute window at Galati exposed. Romania has blinded Russia's intelligence eye on the Black Sea by closing the Constanta consulate that monitored NATO naval activity and weapons flow for years. Romania has placed Article 4 on the table, backed by the strongest factual case any NATO member has presented for its invocation in the current conflict, and Romania is now producing drones rather than simply defending against them, which permanently changes the cost calculation that previously favored Russia in this specific exchange. Putin sent a drone toward Ukraine and it hit the wrong target. It hit a country an hour from NATO's missile shield, next door to Europe's largest military base, hosting the southern gateway for Western weapons flowing to Ukraine. It hit a country that responded by blinding Russia's most valuable Black Sea intelligence asset. It hit a country that is building the architecture to ensure the next drone does not complete its flight. The Kremlin's standard explanation of navigational accident is available for the 29th time. But the consulate in Constanta is closed. Russia's eye on the Black Sea is gone, and the next drone will be shot down. It is necessary at this point to present the other side of this situation honestly, because a credible analysis cannot ignore the arguments Russia and its supporters would offer in response. The Kremlin's technical defense begins with the observation that a single navigational deviation in a 43-drone swarm is not inherently implausible from an engineering standpoint. GPS signal drift, electronic warfare interference from Ukrainian systems operating in the area, or a software fault in the Geran 2E's guidance package could theoretically produce exactly the trajectory deviation that was observed. Russia also points to the fact that Romania is not a neutral party in the conflict. It is supposedly being accidentally affected by. Romania hosts the southern gateway through which Western weapons reach Ukrainian forces fighting Russian troops. Romanian instructors have been involved in training Ukrainian pilots on F-16 aircraft. Romania stations NATO's largest European base on its territory and hosts the Devaselu missile shield that Russia has explicitly named as a direct security threat for years. From Moscow's perspective, Romania's deep involvement in supporting the Ukrainian war effort makes its claims of innocent victimhood difficult to accept at face value. The cost asymmetry argument also carries real analytical weight that serious analysts do not dismiss. Intercepting a drone that costs $50,000 with a Patriot missile that costs $4 million is not a sustainable defensive equation for any military at scale. Russia's strategy of flooding Ukrainian air defenses with large swarms of relatively inexpensive drones specifically exploits this cost differential, and Romania faces the same equation every time it scrambles F-16s against a slow, low-altitude target. Romanian Brigadier General Maxim himself acknowledged after the Galati incident that Romania was not under deliberate attack but was experiencing the consequences of a conflict occurring immediately adjacent to its territory. These arguments are not without merit, and dismissing them entirely would be intellectually dishonest. But they all fail against the same fundamental factual obstacle that Romania's diplomatic response correctly identified. 28 separate incidents over 4 years do not constitute a pattern that the language of navigational accident can credibly explain to any serious observer. The statistical probability of 28 independent navigational failures, all resulting in violations of the same country's airspace, in a context where that country hosts the most sensitive NATO infrastructure in the entire southeastern European theater, exceeds what any honest probability assessment can describe as coincidence. The deeper significance of the Galati incident extends beyond the specific diplomatic and military consequences it has already produced. Every Russian drone that violates NATO territory serves as an accelerant for exactly the military transformation that Russia's strategic interests require slowing down. The €16.68 billion safe package was approved before Galati, but Galati transformed the political environment in which that package will be implemented and expanded. Every allied government that watched a Russian drone injure a Romanian child is a government whose domestic political constraints on defense spending shifted measurably in the direction of greater investment. Every additional Patriot battery deployed, every F-16 added to Romania's fleet, every new drone production agreement signed is a direct consequence of Russia's choice to continue operating drones in ways that produce violations of Allied airspace. Putin's drone campaign against Ukrainian infrastructure is producing a NATO that is more capable, more unified, more operationally prepared, and more politically committed to sustained defense investment than it was before the campaign began. The tactic is achieving the opposite of what a rational strategic assessment would identify as Russia's interest in the NATO-adjacent theater. Every drone that falls on the wrong side of the Danube accelerates the transformation of the alliance it is supposed to be pressuring into compliance. Every violation that produces civilian casualties strengthens the domestic political consensus in NATO member states that defense spending increases are not optional. Every expulsion of a Russian intelligence asset from a NATO port city degrades Russia's ability to monitor the alliance activity it most needs to understand. Putin hit the wrong target on the night of May 29th, not just because the drone crossed the wrong border, but because the entire pattern of 28 violations has been systematically building the military, diplomatic, and political foundations of a NATO response capacity that will be significantly more capable 1 year from now than it is today. The consulate that monitored NATO's Black Sea operations is closed. The weapons that Romania is now building will reach Ukrainian forces through the southern corridor that the closed consulate was designed to watch, and Romania is waiting for the 29th violation with a shoot-down law on the books, a MARIP system approaching operational status, and a population that has now seen a 14-year-old neighbor injured by Russian ordnance. The next drone will not complete its flight.